The gleaming lime-green Lamborghini pulled to an abrupt stop beside the roadside fruit stand, its chrome bumper nearly touching the weathered wooden table where strawberries sat, arranged in perfect crimson rows under the scorching Los Angeles Sunday. Zayn Al Masri had not planned to stop anywhere during his drive from Beverly Hills to his Malibu estate, but something about the way the young woman tended to her fruit with such careful attention had caught his eye from 3 blocks away. He told himself it was merely curiosity about the quality of produce that could be found at such a humble establishment. But as he stepped out of his luxury vehicle and saw her face properly for the first time, he realized that nothing in his 32 years of privilege and wealth had prepared him for the moment when true beauty would stop him in his tracks and change the entire direction of his carefully planned life. Amara Jenkins looked up from arranging her strawberries as the expensive car door slammed shut, and her first instinct was to brace herself for the kind of entitled customer who expected premium service at discount prices simply because they drove an expensive vehicle. At 24, she had been running her grandmother's fruit stand for 3 years, ever since cancer had stolen the woman who had raised her and left her responsible for maintaining the small business that had supported their family for 2 decades. The stand occupied a corner lot in a neighborhood that was rapidly gentrifying, surrounded by new condominiums and trendy restaurants that catered to wealthy transplants who wanted the authentic experience of buying fruit from local vendors without actually caring about the people who provided that authenticity. The neighborhood had been predominantly Black and Latino for generations, filled with families who had built communities around small businesses, churches, and schools that reflected their values and traditions. But rising property values and aggressive development had begun displacing longtime residents, replacing affordable housing with luxury apartments, and pushing out the mom-and-pop establishments that had given the area its character. Amara's fruit stand had become a symbol of resistance against this economic displacement, but it was also a daily reminder of how precarious her position had become. As property taxes rose and wealthy newcomers complained about street vendors disrupting the aesthetic they expected in their expensive neighborhood, Zayn approached the fruit stand with the casual confidence of someone who had never questioned his right to be anywhere or own anything he desired. But something about the young woman's direct gaze and uncompromising posture made him feel suddenly uncertain about the impression he was making. She was beautiful in a way that transcended the artificial perfection he was accustomed to seeing among the socialites and models who populated his usual social circles, with natural hair pulled back in a colorful head wrap and skin that glowed with health and vitality despite the obvious physical demands of working outdoors in challenging conditions. "Good afternoon," Zayn said, his accent carrying the refined pronunciation that came from expensive private schools and years of international business dealings. "Your strawberries look exceptional. Are they locally grown?" The question was innocuous enough, but Amara had learned to be suspicious of wealthy customers who opened conversations with compliments about her produce, because their interest often masked assumptions about her education, background, and business practices that revealed more about their prejudices than their genuine curiosity about fruit quality. "They're from a farm about 50 miles east of here," she replied, her voice carrying the confident professionalism of someone who knew her products and understood her business better than most people understood theirs. "The owner uses sustainable growing practices and pays his workers fair wages, which is why my prices reflect the true cost of ethical agriculture, rather than the artificially low prices you'll find at corporate grocery chains." The response was more sophisticated and politically informed than Zayn had expected from a roadside vendor, and it forced him to reconsider his assumptions about what kind of person would be running this type of small business. Her knowledge of agricultural practices and labor economics suggested an education and awareness that contradicted the stereotypes he had unconsciously absorbed about street vendors and their motivations for choosing such work. "That's admirable," he said, genuinely impressed by her commitment to ethical sourcing despite the obvious financial challenges it must create. Most businesses prioritize profit margins over worker welfare. How do you manage to stay competitive while maintaining those standards? The question revealed either genuine interest in her business philosophy or sophisticated condescension designed to test whether she actually understood the economic principles she had referenced, and Amara studied his face carefully to determine which motivation was driving his inquiry. "I stay competitive by offering superior quality and building relationships with customers who value ethical consumption over convenience, she said. Her tone, suggesting that she had answered this question many times before, and was prepared to defend her business model against skepticism from people who assumed that small vendors couldn't operate according to sophisticated principles. Most people discover that produce grown under fair labor conditions actually tastes better than mass-produced alternatives, and they're willing to pay slightly higher prices for the combination of quality and social responsibility. The customers who only care about getting the cheapest possible price usually move on quickly, which saves both of us time and frustration. Zayn found himself genuinely impressed by her business acumen and ethical framework, but he was also beginning to recognize that his interest in her strawberries was becoming secondary to his fascination with the woman selling them. There was something about her combination of intelligence, principle, and natural beauty that made him want to extend their conversation beyond the simple transaction he had originally intended. "I'd like to buy several containers," he said, reaching for his wallet, with the automatic assumption that money could solve any logistical challenge. "How much would you charge for enough strawberries to serve at a dinner party for 20 people? The mention of a dinner party for 20 people immediately categorized Zayn as the type of wealthy customer who lived in a completely different economic reality from most of her clientele, and Amara felt the familiar tension that came from dealing with people whose casual spending represented more money than she earned in weeks of 12-hour days at the fruit stand. That would be about 8 containers, she calculated quickly, her mind automatically shifting into the customer service mode that required her to be gracious and helpful, regardless of her personal feelings about economic inequality. "I can give you a small bulk discount, so it would be $85 total." Zayn pulled out a money clip containing several $100 bills, the casual display of wealth so automatic that he didn't realize how it might appear to someone who was counting every dollar to keep her small business afloat. "Keep the change," he said, handing her a $100 bill with the kind of generous gesture that wealthy people often made to demonstrate their magnanimity, without considering whether such displays might be patronizing rather than helpful. But instead of the grateful acceptance he expected, Amara handed him back $15 with a firmness that suggested she had strong opinions about charity disguised as business transactions. "I charge fair prices for quality products," she said. "I don't need tips. I need customers who respect the value of what I'm offering." The rejection of his attempted generosity caught Zayn completely off guard, because he was accustomed to having his wealth appreciated rather than questioned, and her insistence on maintaining the dignity of their business relationship forced him to confront assumptions about money and power that he had never examined before. "I apologize," he said, genuinely chastened by her response. "I didn't mean to be condescending. Your prices are fair, and your products are clearly worth every penny." The sincerity in his apology surprised Amara, because wealthy customers who were corrected on their behavior usually became defensive or dismissive rather than acknowledging their mistakes. Something about his willingness to accept criticism and adjust his approach suggested that he might be more open-minded than his expensive clothes and luxury car had initially indicated. "Thank you," she said, her tone softening slightly as she began to package his strawberries with the care and attention that she gave to every sale, regardless of the customer's economic status. Most people don't realize that small business owners need respect as much as we need revenue. Treating us like charity cases undermines the dignity of what we're trying to accomplish. As she arranged the strawberry containers in a sturdy bag, Zayn found himself studying her hands, noticing the way her fingers moved with practiced efficiency, and the small calluses that testified to years of physical labor that his own pampered existence had never required. There was something about her competence and self-possession that made him feel suddenly aware of his own limitations, the ways that wealth had insulated him from the kinds of challenges that built character and resilience. "What got you started in the fruit business?" he asked, genuinely curious about the path that had led her to this corner lot and this life of physical work and financial uncertainty. The question opened a door to memories that Amara usually kept private, because sharing her family history with customers required a level of vulnerability that could be dangerous when dealing with people who might use personal information to exploit or manipulate her situation. "This was my grandmother's stand," she said finally, deciding that his genuine interest deserved an honest response. She started it 25 years ago after my grandfather died and left her with no income and 3 children to support. She taught me that honest work was the foundation of self-respect and that serving your community was the highest calling anyone could have. The story of multi-generational entrepreneurship and family values resonated with Zayn in unexpected ways. Because his own fortune had been built by his grandfather, who had immigrated to America with nothing but ambition and a willingness to work harder than his competitors. The parallel between their family histories created a connection that transcended their obvious differences in current circumstances. "Your grandmother sounds like she was a remarkable woman," he said, his voice carrying genuine respect for the strength and determination it must have taken to build a successful business from nothing while raising children alone. "Is she still involved in the operation?" The question brought tears to Amara's eyes, because her grandmother's death was still too recent and too painful to discuss without emotional difficulty. But something about Zayn's respectful tone made her feel safe enough to share the truth about her loss and its impact on her life. "She passed away 3 years ago," Amara said quietly, her voice carrying the kind of grief that never fully heals, but learns to coexist with daily responsibilities. "Cancer took her faster than any of us expected, and I inherited the stand along with the responsibility of keeping her legacy alive." The admission of her grandmother's death and her own sense of inherited responsibility revealed the weight of expectation and financial pressure that she carried every day, transforming her from a simple fruit vendor into someone who was fighting to preserve family history and community tradition against forces much larger than herself. Zayn felt a surge of admiration for her courage and dedication, but also a recognition that his privilege had protected him from the kind of loss and responsibility that had shaped her character in ways that his wealth could never purchase. "That's an enormous responsibility for someone so young," he said. "How do you manage the financial and emotional challenges of running a business while grieving such a significant loss?" The question demonstrated an understanding of the complex intersection between personal loss and professional obligation that surprised Amara with its insight and sensitivity, because most people either ignored the emotional dimensions of small business ownership or offered simplistic advice that revealed their ignorance about the realities of her situation. "Some days are harder than others," she admitted, appreciating his recognition that her work involved more than just selling fruit. "But my grandmother taught me that the best way to honor someone's memory is to continue the work they started and to help other people the way they helped you." This stand represents her values and her commitment to the community. "So keeping it going is my way of keeping her spirit alive." The philosophical framework that guided Amara's approach to business and life impressed Zayn with its depth and authenticity, revealing a person whose motivations were rooted in love, loyalty, and service, rather than the pursuit of wealth and status that drove most of the people in his social circle. Her grandmother's wisdom had created a foundation of meaning and purpose that his expensive education had failed to provide. As their conversation continued, other customers began to approach the fruit stand, and Zayn realized that he was monopolizing the time and attention of someone who needed to serve multiple people in order to earn enough money to support herself. But he found himself reluctant to end their interaction, because talking with Amara had awakened something in him that had been dormant for years, a capacity for genuine connection that his wealth and status had made difficult to access. "I should let you attend to your other customers," he said reluctantly, picking up his bag of strawberries with the awareness that leaving would mean returning to a life that suddenly felt empty and artificial compared to the authenticity he had encountered at her fruit stand. "Thank you for understanding," Amara replied, but her tone suggested that she had also enjoyed their conversation and was not entirely eager to see it end. "I hope you and your guests enjoy the strawberries." As Zayn walked back toward his lime green Lamborghini, he found himself turning around before he reached the driver's door, drawn by an impulse that he could not entirely explain or justify. "Would you be interested in having dinner sometime?" he asked, his voice carrying an uncertainty that was completely foreign to someone accustomed to having his invitations accepted without question. The dinner invitation hung in the air between them like a bridge across the enormous gap in their economic circumstances, and Amara felt herself torn between attraction to his obvious intelligence and sincerity and wariness about the complications that would inevitably arise from any relationship between someone of his wealth and someone of her modest means. "I don't think that would be a good idea," she said finally, her tone gentle but firm. "We live in very different worlds, and I've learned that those differences usually create more problems than they solve." The rejection stung, but Zayn recognized the wisdom in her caution, and the ways that his privilege might indeed create complications for someone whose life required constant attention to practical concerns that he never had to consider. "I understand," he said, "but if you ever change your mind, I'll be back to buy more strawberries." The promise of return visits was both reassuring and troubling, because Amara found herself genuinely attracted to this man, whose wealth represented everything she had been taught to distrust, but whose personal demeanor suggested depths of character that contradicted her expectations about wealthy people and their motivations. Over the following weeks, Zayn became a regular customer at the fruit stand, arriving every few days to purchase strawberries, oranges, or whatever seasonal produce Amara recommended, but clearly using these transactions as opportunities to continue the conversations that had begun with their first encounter. His genuine interest in her business, her family history, and her perspectives on community development revealed a curiosity and respect that gradually broke down her initial resistance to his attention. During one of these visits, Amara mentioned that the property owner had been pressuring her to either pay significantly higher rent or vacate the corner lot to make way for a coffee shop that would serve the growing population of wealthy residents who were transforming the neighborhood's economic and cultural character. "How much of an increase are they demanding?" Zayn asked, his tone suggesting that he understood the implications of such financial pressure for a small business operating on narrow profit margins. "They want to triple the rent," Amara replied, her voice carrying the stress and uncertainty that had been keeping her awake at night as she tried to calculate whether any possible cost-cutting or revenue increase could make the new rent affordable. "They know I can't afford that, so it's really just a polite way of evicting me." The injustice of using financial pressure to force out a business that had served the community for decades struck Zayn as emblematic of larger patterns of economic displacement that he had never considered from the perspective of people who were harmed rather than benefited by development and gentrification. "What if someone were to help you secure a long-term lease at your current rate?" he suggested carefully, aware that any offer of financial assistance would need to be presented in a way that preserved her dignity and autonomy, rather than making her feel like a charity case. Amara studied his face intently, trying to determine whether his suggestion represented genuine support for her business or a wealthy man's attempt to solve problems with money in ways that might create new forms of dependence and obligation. "That's very generous," she said slowly, "but I need to maintain control over my own business decisions. I can't accept help that comes with strings attached, or expectations about how I should run my operation." Her insistence on maintaining independence, even in the face of financial crisis, impressed Zayn with its integrity and strength, but it also frustrated him because his wealth seemed to create barriers to helping, rather than opportunities to support someone whose work he had come to genuinely admire and value. "What if the help came with no strings attached?" he asked. "What if someone simply believed that your business provided value to the community and deserved protection from economic forces that have nothing to do with the quality of what you're offering?" The conversation about financial assistance forced both of them to confront the fundamental tension between his desire to help and her need to maintain dignity and autonomy, but it also revealed the depth of care and respect that had developed between them, despite their different backgrounds and circumstances. After weeks of daily conversations and growing mutual attraction, Amara finally agreed to have dinner with Zayn, but only on the condition that they meet at a restaurant in her neighborhood, where she felt comfortable, and where the economic dynamics between them would be less obvious than they would be at the expensive establishments he usually frequented. The restaurant she chose was a small family-owned establishment that served traditional soul food in an atmosphere of warmth and community that reflected the values of the neighborhood she was fighting to preserve. As they shared a meal of fried chicken, collard greens, and cornbread, Zayn found himself experiencing a level of authenticity and human connection that his wealth had made increasingly difficult to access. "This is the best meal I've had in years," he said, genuinely amazed by flavors and cooking techniques that bore no resemblance to the sophisticated cuisine he was accustomed to consuming at expensive restaurants, where presentation was valued more than substance. Food tastes better when it's prepared with love rather than just technique, Amara replied, watching his obvious enjoyment with the satisfaction that comes from sharing something meaningful with someone who can appreciate its value. My grandmother used to say that the secret ingredient in any good meal was the cook's intention to nourish people, rather than just impress them. As their relationship deepened over the following months, Zayn found himself spending more time in Amara's neighborhood, volunteering at community events, supporting local businesses, and learning about the history and culture of people whose experiences had been completely foreign to his previous existence. The process of seeing the world through her eyes forced him to confront the ways that his privilege had insulated him from understanding the challenges faced by people who looked different from him or came from different economic backgrounds. Amara, for her part, discovered that beneath Zayn's wealth and sophistication lay a person of genuine kindness and curiosity, who was willing to question his own assumptions and change his behavior when presented with new information about inequality and social justice. His willingness to learn and grow, combined with his respect for her independence and intelligence, gradually overcame her initial skepticism about dating someone whose economic power could potentially overwhelm her autonomy. The relationship that developed between them was not without challenges, because their different backgrounds created ongoing tensions about money, lifestyle, and the social expectations that came with Zayn's wealth and status. But their mutual respect, genuine affection, and shared commitment to justice and community service provided a foundation strong enough to support the work of building something meaningful together. When Zayn eventually proposed marriage, he did so not with an expensive ring or elaborate ceremony, but by asking Amara to partner with him in creating a foundation that would support small businesses owned by women and people of color who were fighting against economic displacement and gentrification. The proposal represented not just personal commitment, but shared purpose, a recognition that their love could become a force for positive change rather than just private happiness. Their wedding took place in the same neighborhood where they had met, surrounded by the community that had shaped Amara's values and welcomed Zayn as he learned to use his privilege in service of justice rather than just personal advancement. The ceremony was simple, but meaningful, reflecting their shared belief that true wealth was measured by the strength of relationships and the positive impact of one's actions, rather than the accumulation of material possessions. Years later, as they worked together to expand their foundation and support dozens of small businesses that were preserving community character against economic pressures, both Zayn and Amara would remember the afternoon when a simple stop for strawberries had changed the entire direction of their lives. The fruit stand remained in operation, now secure on land that the foundation had purchased and permanently designated for community businesses, serving as a symbol of what became possible when privilege was combined with purpose and love, transcended the artificial barriers created by wealth and social status. The story of their meeting and marriage became legendary in their community, proof that genuine connection could overcome any obstacle, and that love had the power to transform not just individual lives, but entire neighborhoods, when it was grounded in respect, justice, and shared commitment to something larger than personal happiness. The wealthy Arab businessman and the young black fruit vendor had found in each other not just romantic love, but partnership in the work of creating a more equitable and compassionate world.